When the relationship ended, it didn't end loudly. There was no screaming, no shattered glass, no dramatic exit with slammed doors and raised voices echoing down the hallway. It ended quietly, too quietly, like something slipping out of your hands while you're distracted, like a wallet falling from a pocket you didn't realize was open. I remember sitting across from her at the kitchen table, the same table we picked together 3 years earlier, when we still spoke in futures and shared dreams like they were guaranteed. The room was painfully ordinary. Morning light crept through half-open blinds. A coffee mug sat untouched between us, growing cold. She looked calm. Prepared. That should have warned me. I think we should separate things cleanly, she said, her tone steady, practiced. No drama. No lawyers. Just fair. That word always sounds honest until you realize who gets to define it. I nodded, even though something in my chest tightened. At the time, I still believed in her. Still believed that the person across from me was the same one who had promised we were a team. That whatever happened between us, we'd never turn on each other. I was wrong. Within a week, she had moved quickly, faster than I expected, faster than I was ready for. Accounts were emptied. Assets were reallocated. Shared property was suddenly no longer shared. She took the car, the equipment, the client list we built together. Even the apartment lease was transferred into her name while I was still packing boxes. Legally clean. Emotionally devastating. By the time I realized what was happening, the damage was already done. She smiled when she handed me the final paperwork. Not cruelly. Not mockingly. Confidently. I think this is best for both of us, she said. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I didn't tell her she'd gone too far. I just signed. Because what she didn't know, what she never thought to ask about, was that some things aren't obvious at first glance. And some signatures don't mean what people think they mean. The aftermath was quiet. Too quiet. My apartment felt hollow without the furniture she took. Without the equipment she claimed. Without the reminders of a life that used to feel mutual. I slept on a mattress on the floor. Ate meals standing up. Watched the city lights through a window that no longer felt like home. From the outside, it looked like she had won. She posted updates online, subtle ones. New office. New car. New energy. People congratulated her on moving forward and knowing her worth. They didn't see the way she had gutted everything we built together to fuel her clean break. And I let them believe it. Because anger would have given her confirmation. Resistance would have given her friction. And friction is how people notice mistakes. Silence, on the other hand, makes people reckless. I reviewed every document she'd rushed me to sign. Every contract we'd entered together. Every agreement we drafted back when trust made us careless. I didn't rush. I didn't skim. I read slowly, line by line, clause by clause. That's when I found it. Buried deep in one of our earliest contracts, the one she insisted was standard, the one she never bothered revisiting, was a clause she had forgotten entirely. A contingency we added years ago, back when I handled the back-end details and she focused on the front-facing work. A clause that only activated under very specific conditions. Conditions that had just been met. It didn't reverse ownership. It didn't undo the breakup. It didn't give me anything back immediately. What it did was far worse. It created liability. Massive liability. And the clock had already started ticking. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, feeling something cold settle into place inside me. Not rage. Not sadness. Clarity. She thought she had taken everything. She didn't realize she had also inherited every consequence. And for the first time since the breakup, I smiled. I didn't celebrate when I found the clause. I didn't laugh. I didn't feel triumphant. I just sat there, reading it again and again, letting the words settle into place like pieces of a puzzle I didn't realize I'd been holding for years. It was a contingency clause. Boring. Technical. The kind of thing people skip over because it doesn't feel immediate or dramatic. We'd written it early, back when we were still cautious, still protective of what we were building. Back when I handled the legal frameworks and she handled the image. It was designed for one scenario only, unilateral asset control following partnership dissolution. At the time, it felt unlikely. Hypothetical. Something you include because responsible people do, not because you expect to use it. But here it was. The clause didn't void ownership. It didn't reverse transfers. It didn't challenge the breakup. That's what made it dangerous. It allowed the transfer, but attached responsibility to it. All ongoing obligations. All liabilities. All future compliance requirements. Including ones she had no idea existed. The clause required the controlling party to maintain certain operational standards. Financial disclosures. Regulatory filings. Insurance thresholds. Miss one requirement, and penalties didn't fall on the partnership. They fell on the controller. And the clock didn't start when the breakup happened. It started when the assets changed hands. Which meant she was already behind. I checked the calendar. Counted the days. Then I checked public records. She hadn't filed anything. Not one compliance update. Not one disclosure. Not one acknowledgement of assumption. Not because she was careless. Because she didn't know. People assume contracts protect the loudest person in the room. They don't. They protect the one who reads. I closed the document and leaned back, feeling something steady settle in my chest. Not revenge. Not relief. Balance. I didn't need to act. I didn't need to warn her. The clause didn't require notice. It required adherence. And ignorance, legally, isn't a defense. I made a single call the next morning, to a compliance consultant I trusted. I didn't ask for advice on retaliation. I asked one question only. What happens if these requirements aren't met? There was a pause on the line. Then, it gets expensive. Very fast. That was enough. She built fast. Too fast. Within weeks, she had rebranded everything. New logos. New messaging. New energy. She spoke confidently about her company, her vision, her future. She expanded operations, took on new clients, invested aggressively. From the outside, it looked impressive. From the inside, it was reckless. Because every step forward widened the fault line beneath her feet. I watched quietly. Not obsessively, just attentively. Public filings. Announcements. Social posts. Interviews. She was loud now, certain, convinced she had escaped clean. Success makes people forget caution. And caution was exactly what the clause demanded. Each new contract she signed increased exposure. Each expansion multiplied obligations she wasn't fulfilling. Every month that passed without compliance turned manageable penalties into compounded ones. I didn't interfere. I didn't slow her down. I didn't correct her mistakes. I let momentum do the damage. One evening, I saw her post a photo from her new office. Bright smile. Confident caption. Comments full of praise. I zoomed in on the image, not out of nostalgia, but habit. In the background, on a whiteboard, were figures I recognized. Projections based on assumptions that only worked if everything was properly registered and insured. It wasn't. She was building on paper-thin ground, and she didn't know it yet. I felt no joy watching it happen. Only certainty. This wasn't something that could be undone with an apology or a conversation. This wasn't emotional. It was procedural. Systemic. Automatic. Consequences don't need anger. They just need time. And time was doing exactly what it always does. The first notice didn't arrive with urgency. No red letters. No threatening language. Just a formal email, polite, neutral, easy to dismiss if you didn't know what it meant. She ignored it. Most people do. It came from a regulatory body she'd never dealt with personally. Back when we were together, I handled those interactions quietly, the way back-end work always gets done, without applause, without recognition. She never needed to understand it. She only needed to trust that it was handled. Now it wasn't. The notice outlined a routine compliance check. A request for documentation. A deadline generous enough to feel optional. Nothing alarming on the surface. But the clause didn't care about appearances. Deadlines existed whether you respected them or not. I found out about the notice through a mutual contact, not intentionally, not maliciously. Someone mentioned, casually, that she seemed annoyed by some pointless admin nonsense. I nodded, said nothing. Because pointless admin nonsense is how consequences introduce themselves. Days passed. Then weeks. She expanded again. New partnership. New announcement. Bigger promises. Each move layered more obligation on top of an already unstable foundation. The second notice was less polite. Still professional, but firmer. More specific. It referenced the first one. Highlighted missing documentation. Shortened the response window. She noticed this one. I could tell by the shift in her tone online. Less celebratory. More defensive. She made vague posts about bureaucracy slowing innovation and systems designed to punish growth. People agreed with her. They always do. Nobody cheers for paperwork. But paperwork doesn't need applause. It just needs to exist. By the time the third notice arrived, penalties had already begun accruing. Quietly. Automatically. Interest compounding daily. The clause didn't require notification to former partners. It didn't require mediation. It didn't care about emotional context. It only cared about compliance. And she was failing it. I didn't feel satisfaction watching it unfold. What I felt was inevitability. This wasn't revenge. This was gravity. She reached out to me for the first time in months. Not directly. Not honestly. She sent a casual message, light, almost friendly. Asked how I was doing. Said she hoped I was landing on my feet. I replied politely, briefly. Nothing more. A few days later, she tried again. This time, she mentioned the notices. Do you remember how we used to handle this stuff? She asked. I think something's off. I read the message slowly. Then I set my phone down. Silence isn't avoidance. It's positioning. If I responded, I became involved. If I advised, I assumed responsibility. If I corrected her, I reset the clock. And the clause rewarded patience. She followed up once more. This message wasn't casual. It was anxious. They're escalating things. I don't understand why it's getting so serious. I understood perfectly. But understanding doesn't obligate intervention. I typed a response. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that, too. Then I sent a single sentence. I'm sure you'll figure it out. It wasn't cruel. It was honest. She stopped messaging after that. And that's when the real pressure began. Because systems don't negotiate. They don't empathize. They don't remember shared history or past affection. They operate on rules. And the rules had already been broken. Behind the scenes, audits triggered automatically. Flags appeared. Reviews escalated. None of it public. None of it dramatic. She was running faster now, trying to outpace something that didn't chase. Consequences don't chase. They wait. And silence, true silence, lets them arrive undisturbed. Audits don't arrive with drama. They don't storm in or accuse or demand confessions. They begin quietly, almost politely, like a knock you don't answer because you assume it isn't meant for you. For her, it started as a request for clarification. A review of filings. A routine follow-up connected to the notices she'd already dismissed as unnecessary interference. She treated it the same way she treated everything that didn't immediately serve her momentum. She delayed. She asked for extensions. Gave partial information. Responded confidently, assuming confidence could substitute completeness. It couldn't. Audits aren't interested in confidence. They're interested in consistency. They compare what you say now to what you should have said then. They look for patterns, not excuses. And patterns were exactly what she had created. Each missed filing linked to another. Each assumption rested on documentation that didn't exist. Each expansion she'd celebrated publicly introduced obligations she'd never fulfilled privately. What she didn't understand was that the audit wasn't hunting for wrongdoing. It was mapping exposure. And the map was filling in fast. I learned about the audit through public channels. Nothing confidential, nothing improper. Certain reviews have to be registered. Certain actions leave traces. If you know where to look, the signs are unmistakable. Her world was being examined under a light she couldn't charm her way out of. She called me again. This time, she didn't pretend it was casual. I need help, she said. Her voice sounded smaller. Tighter. like someone trying to keep panic contained behind professionalism. They're asking for things I don't have, she admitted. They're treating it like I should have known. I didn't respond right away. She filled the silence quickly. I thought everything transferred cleanly, she said. You never said. I stopped her gently. I didn't say what? She paused, because saying it out loud meant acknowledging it. She exhaled slowly. I didn't know there were ongoing requirements like this. There was. Ignorance. The clause didn't care. I told her the truth, not all of it, just enough. Some agreements carry responsibilities beyond ownership, I said. They always have. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked the question she should have asked months ago. Is there a way to undo it? I answered honestly. No. Audits don't rewind. They conclude. And she was running out of time. The call didn't come from her. It came from her attorney. Professional. Direct. Careful with every word. They wanted clarification about my role in the original contracts. Specifically, the clause. They didn't accuse me of anything. They didn't threaten. They asked questions designed to confirm what they already suspected. I answered calmly. Precisely. I explained when the clause was drafted. Why it existed. How it functioned. I didn't editorialize. I didn't speculate. I didn't mention the breakup. Emotion has no place in legal conversations. By the end of the call, the tone had shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. The attorney thanked me. Said they'd be in touch if anything else was needed. They never were. Because the clause was airtight. Her attorney couldn't negotiate it away. Couldn't reinterpret it. Couldn't argue intent. Contracts don't care about intent. They care about language. And the language was clear. She called me that night. No pretense this time. I didn't know, she said immediately. I swear I didn't know. I believe you, I said. That surprised her. You do? Yes. Because believing her didn't change anything. Ignorance wasn't malicious, but it was still costly. They're saying I'm personally liable, she continued. That I assumed responsibility when I took control. I said nothing. They're talking about penalties, she whispered. About damages. About things I can't cover. I closed my eyes briefly. This was the moment people imagine revenge feels good. It didn't. It felt final. I need you to tell them this wasn't intentional, she said. That it was a misunderstanding. I chose my words carefully. I can tell them the truth, I said. Nothing more. The truth was enough. After we hung up, I sat alone in my apartment, still sparse, still quiet. I felt no urge to celebrate. No impulse to gloat. What I felt was distance. The kind that forms when a chapter ends cleanly. She took everything she thought mattered. And inherited everything she didn't see. There's a moment in every unraveling when denial gives way to arithmetic. Not emotion. Not anger. Numbers. Because numbers don't care how confident you feel or how loudly you insist you were right. They sit there, unchanged, waiting for you to accept them. For her, that moment came when the projections stopped lining up with reality. Penalties compounded faster than revenue. Compliance costs ballooned. Obligations she didn't even know existed suddenly had deadlines attached, and consequences. Every spreadsheet told the same story. She wasn't losing money. She was bleeding responsibility. The business still looked successful from the outside. Social media posts continued. Press mentions stayed flattering. To anyone watching casually, she was thriving. But inside, the numbers were screaming. Cash flow tightened. Advisors grew cautious. Vendors asked for assurances she couldn't confidently give. Each conversation felt heavier than the last, as if everyone sensed instability but no one wanted to be the first to say it aloud. She called me again. Not panicked. Not pleading. Just tired. I don't understand how it got this bad so fast, she said. I did. The clause wasn't dramatic. It didn't trigger collapse overnight. It introduced friction. Slow, grinding, cumulative. That's how real consequences work. They say I'm responsible for legacy obligations, she continued. Even ones from before the transfer. Yes, I said simply. That doesn't make sense. It does, I replied. If you know what to look for. She sighed. I thought ownership meant freedom. Ownership meant accountability. She started talking about selling assets, scaling back, finding partners. Every solution came with a cost she couldn't absorb without exposing more weaknesses. And the more she adjusted, the more visible the damage became. Numbers have a way of revealing truth faster than words ever could. Her world wasn't collapsing because of me. It was collapsing because it was built on assumptions she never verified. The public never saw the late nights. They didn't see her staring at contracts until the words blurred together. Didn't hear the hushed phone calls with advisors who had stopped offering optimism and started offering containment strategies. They saw curated success. What they didn't see was the erosion. She stopped posting as often. Interviews were postponed. Partnerships quietly dissolved without explanation. Momentum slowed, not enough to cause headlines, but enough to cause questions. That's how reputations weaken. Not with scandal. With silence. Inside, the pressure was constant. Every decision now had legal weight. Every expansion required approvals she couldn't afford to delay. Every misstep carried amplified risk. She reached out one final time, not for help, but for understanding. I didn't mean to take everything, she said. I thought I was just protecting myself. I believed her. Self-preservation can look a lot like theft when fear is driving. I know, I replied. There was a long pause. Do you hate me? She asked. I thought about it honestly. No, I said. I don't feel anything like that. That hurt her more than anger would have. Because hatred implies attachment. This was detachment. She had taken what she wanted without asking what it carried. And now she was learning that ownership without comprehension isn't power. It's exposure. The contracts did exactly what they were designed to do. Not punish, not retaliate, but rebalance. They ensured that anyone who assumed control also assumed consequence. I didn't have to confront her. I didn't have to warn her. I didn't have to chase justice. The structure handled it. By the time the final notices arrived, the damage was irreversible. Not catastrophic, but permanent. She would recover. People always do. But she would never be careless again. And that was the real cost. The settlement didn't arrive like a storm. There were no threats. No raised voices. No dramatic ultimatums. It arrived as an email with an attachment and a subject line so neutral it almost felt polite. Proposed resolution. She opened it expecting negotiation. What she found instead was inevitability. The document didn't accuse her of wrongdoing. It didn't frame her as malicious or reckless. It simply outlined responsibility, cleanly, clearly, without emotion. Liabilities transferred with ownership. Operational penalties triggered by noncompliance. Deferred obligations activated by missed thresholds. Everything was already in motion. The settlement wasn't asking permission. It was offering mercy. Her legal team reviewed it in silence. Not the nervous kind, but the kind that happens when professionals realize they've reached the edge of leverage. This is thorough, one of them finally said. That was an understatement. The agreement gave her a way out, but not a clean one. Assets would be liquidated. Certain rights forfeited. Future claims waived. Control returned, not to me, but to a neutral holding structure designed to stabilize what remained. She wouldn't be ruined, but she would be stripped of the illusion that she had won. She called me before signing. Not to argue. Not to accuse. Just to understand. I didn't see it, she said quietly. Any of it. I know, I replied. There was no satisfaction in that moment. No thrill. Just confirmation. She asked if this was what I wanted. I told her the truth. I wanted balance, I said. This is just how it showed up. She laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because it was unavoidable. I thought leaving meant freedom, she said. Leaving without understanding never does. She signed the settlement the next morning. Not because she agreed with it, because she finally understood it. After the settlement, things grew quiet. Not the awkward kind of quiet filled with unresolved tension, but the kind that settles when decisions are finished and consequences have landed. We didn't speak again. There was no need. I regained control of what mattered, not the assets, not the business, not the structures she once fought to claim. I regained clarity. The contracts were amended. The obligations redistributed. The system stabilized under new leadership that understood its weight. And me? I walked away lighter. Not victorious. Free. People often imagine revenge as something loud. Something sharp. Something that announces itself. But real reckoning is subtle. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand applause. It just corrects the imbalance and moves on. She rebuilt, slowly, carefully, with a caution she hadn't needed before. That was her lesson. Mine was simpler. Trust without comprehension is vulnerability. Silence, when backed by structure, is power. I didn't take anything from her. I let her keep what she insisted on owning. And that made all the difference. From the outside, the narrative was clean. A breakup. A business split. Two adults moving on. That's the version people prefer. It's simple. Comfortable. It allows everyone to keep believing that control always belongs to the boldest voice in the room. She leaned into that version. Interviews framed her as resilient. Posts spoke about new chapters and hard but necessary choices. She never mentioned contracts or clauses or obligations. Only growth, lessons, forward motion. People applauded. They always do when a story sounds familiar. But behind the scenes, the reality was heavier. The company she now owned required constant mitigation. Advisors rotated in and out. Systems were reworked repeatedly to keep the structure compliant. Every move required caution, approvals, documentation. She couldn't take risks anymore. Not because she lacked ambition, but because risk now belonged to her. That's what the public never understands. Success isn't just opportunity. It's weight. And the heavier the structure, the less room there is for improvisation. I watched all of it from a distance. Not out of bitterness, but curiosity. I wanted to know if she would recognize the pattern. If she would ever realize that what slowed her wasn't the breakup, or the market, or bad luck. It was ownership she hadn't earned through understanding. She never said my name publicly. That wasn't kindness. It was protection. Because the moment the truth surfaced, the narrative would fracture. People would start asking questions she couldn't answer without exposing how unprepared she'd been. So the story stayed polished. And the cost stayed private. People often ask, if they know the full story, why I didn't stop her. Why I didn't say something when I saw the mistakes forming. Why I didn't warn her before she signed. Why I let it happen. The answer is simple. Warnings only work on people who want to listen. She didn't. At the time, she wanted certainty, control, finality. She wanted the feeling of walking away with something tangible enough to justify the pain of leaving. And I understood that. But understanding someone doesn't obligate you to rescue them from their own choices. I could have explained the clauses, pointed out the liabilities, highlighted the risks she was inheriting. She would have heard fear, not facts. She would have assumed I was bluffing. That's what confidence does when it's untested. It mistakes silence for weakness and caution for manipulation. So I stayed quiet, not out of spite, out of respect for her autonomy. She made a choice. I honored it. The contracts didn't punish her for leaving. They didn't exist to trap or deceive. They existed to balance responsibility. If she wanted ownership, she had to accept its full weight. And she did. Just later than she expected. I don't regret my silence. Because intervention would have delayed the lesson, not prevented it. And some lessons only arrive when no one steps in to soften them. I knew it was over long before the settlement was signed. Not when the email arrived. Not when the lawyers stopped pushing back. Not even when she stopped calling. I knew it was over the day she stopped blaming me. There was a brief window, just a few weeks, where she tried to frame everything as betrayal. As manipulation. As something done to her rather than something she had chosen. That phase didn't last. Reality has a way of exhausting denial. The tone of her messages changed. They became shorter, more careful, less emotional. She stopped asking why and started asking how. How do I fix this? How do I slow this down? How do I survive this without losing everything? Those questions told me everything. She had crossed from anger into awareness. That's the most painful transition a person can make, when you realize no one pushed you, no one tricked you, no one stole anything. You walked into the consequences yourself. The final conversation we had wasn't dramatic. No tears. No raised voices. Just clarity. "I didn't think responsibility would feel like this," she said. "It usually doesn't, until it does," I replied. She asked if I ever considered stepping in earlier. I told her the truth. "Yes," I said. "But it wouldn't have changed anything." She was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said something that surprised me. "I see it now. Not the clause. Not the contracts. Not the structure. The pattern." She saw how she'd moved fast, grabbed control, and ignored the weight underneath. How she'd equated possession with power and assumed confidence would fill the gaps knowledge should have. That moment, when someone finally sees themselves clearly, is the end of the story. Everything after that is just logistics. I wished her well. And I meant it. Because by then, there was nothing left to win. People expect revenge to look like destruction. They imagine shouting, exposure, public collapse. A villain punished loudly enough to satisfy an audience. But real revenge, the kind that lasts, doesn't look like that at all. It looks like restraint. It looks like preparation. It looks like letting someone insist on taking everything and allowing them to keep it. Because when people take more than they understand, they don't gain power. They inherit weight. I didn't need to ruin her. I didn't need to embarrass her. I didn't need to chase validation or closure. I trusted the structure. And structure never rushes. It waits. Today, she's still out there. Still working. Still rebuilding. Wiser than before. Slower. More careful. That's not punishment. That's consequence. As for me, I walked away with something far more valuable than assets or control. I walked away unburdened. I learned that silence, when backed by preparation, is not weakness. It's patience. That fairness doesn't require confrontation. That justice doesn't always announce itself. And that sometimes, the cleanest ending is the one where no one claps. If there's a lesson here, it's not about revenge. It's about ownership. Never take what you don't fully understand. Never confuse control with freedom. And never assume the quiet person in the room has nothing planned. Because sometimes, the most devastating move is simply stepping aside. And letting someone live with exactly what they demanded.